Good evening. I'm Bob Dines, the Chancellor at University of California, San Diego, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this Town Hall Forum on Cyberspace Security. Let me begin by thanking our hosts, the Neuroscience Institute and Jerry Adelman, for this, of course, spectacular setting. I wish we had a place like this on the campus. I would also like to thank the White House for organizing this nationally important series, and of course for wisely choosing San Diego as one of its sites. Over the past 2 decades, San Diego has emerged as a center for innovation in neuroscience, telecommunications, and biotechnology. And over the next decade, this region will play an equally important role in generating new tools and strategies for homeland preparedness. We have this potential because we have a unique partnership in this community across public and private sectors. Such teamwork has brought San Diego out of the era of R&D and into the era of RD&D, research, development, and delivery. RD&D is a cornerstone of the San Diego Regional Homeland Network, Homeland Security, a model of proactive collaboration, and this network has brought together academics, researchers, regional government, industry, federal, state policymakers, military leaders, and most importantly, local first responders. This past weekend, we've had 2 zoos in this town, one being the usual San Diego Zoo and the other the Super Bowl. A team from the network's Information Technology and Cybersecurity Working Group, including UCSD faculty and students, representatives from several industries, including Qualcomm, help augment the San Diego Police Department's robust security procedures. This project, while not mission critical, provided the San Diego Police Department with valuable additional assets for managing this high-profile event. And most importantly for us, it demonstrated how the network can and will collaborate effectively across these different groups with frontline first responders to enhance the region's preparedness. This network has shown early signs of success because it operates on a foundation developed by far-sighted leaders in the community. And it gives me the opportunity to introduce you to one of those far-sighted leaders, First District Supervisor Greg Cox. Greg has had a keen grasp of the need for collaboration across our community, in large part because he has served many parts of the community. Before he was elected in the San Diego County Board of Supervisors in 1995, Greg was an educator in the Sweetwater Union High School District, the mayor of Chula Vista, a professional consultant, and an advisor to California Governor Pete Wilson. He is a past president of the League of California Cities and is currently represents San Diego on the National Association of Counties and the California State Association of Counties. Please join me in welcoming Greg Cox.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dines. On behalf of the County of San Diego and the entire San Diego County region, I would like to welcome the President's Critical Infrastructure Protection Board to San Diego. It is appropriate that you have chosen San Diego as your final stop for the Cyberspace Town Hall meetings. San Diego is a rich melting pot that brings all elements in your blueprint into a single region. We have a rich mix of leading academic institutions, world-class industrial and commercial companies, significant military commands, and complex regions of local governmental entities. We face a number of tough technical issues within all the elements of our nation as the world of information and technology explodes. We want to partner in solutions and are looking forward to today's town hall discussions and listening to our panel describe some of the pertinent issues facing us. Again, thank you for coming and welcome to our region. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for tonight's program, and that is Peter G. Neumann, who is with SRI Computer Science Laboratory. Peter Neumann has doctorates from Harvard and Darmstadt. After 10 years at Bell Labs in Murray Hill, New Jersey in the 1960s, he has been in SRI's Computer Science Lab since September 1971. He is concerned with computer systems and networks, security, reliability, survivability, safety, and many risk-related issues such as voting system integrity, crypto policy, social implications, and human needs, including privacy. He moderates the ACM Risks Forum, edits CACM's monthly Inside Risk column, chairs the ACM Committee on Computers and Public Policy, co-chairs the ACM Advisory Committee on Security and Privacy, co-founded People for Internet Responsibility, and co-founded the Union for Representative International Internet Cooperation and Analysis. That's a mouthful. His book, Computer-Related Risks, is in its 5th printing. He is a fellow of the ACM, IEEE, and AAAS, and also an SRI fellow. I hope you know what all that means. He is the 2002 recipient of the National Computer System Security Award. He is a member of the U.S. General Accounting Office Executive Council on Information Management and Technology, and the National Science Foundation Computer Information Science and Engineering Advisory Board. He has taught at Stanford, UC Berkeley, and the University of Maryland. He also has his own website, which you can check for further information. Please, won't you welcome Peter Neumann.
I was hoping you wouldn't read all that, but that's the way it goes. I want to thank you all for coming. It's evident that you will have to miss the Democratic rebuttal to the State of the Union. And so you've opted for a session that I hope will shed a great deal of light on the problems that we are dealing with. I would like to first introduce the panel. It's an extraordinarily diverse and balanced panel with a rather interesting collection of backgrounds and experiences and views. And I think we will have a very interesting evening. We're going to run this as a very open session, and I'd like you all to be to feel free as if you're sort of among family. Nice open discussion. Let's try to avoid polemics. Let's try to avoid personal attacks and all the usual caveats that are normally sometimes occurring in meetings of this nature. Above all, don't shoot the messenger. Each of us is a messenger for various things, and that will emerge in the discussion. Don't assume anything about any of the positions that anybody might have on this panel, because I think you'll find that there's a rather nice collection of open minds that we have to deal with. I will ask all of the speakers who would like to speak from the audience to come to a microphone, and I will cue you in when it's your turn. And I'd like to limit you to 1 minute, whether you wish to make a statement or a question or a combination of both, that's fine. But let's try to avoid long and protracted discussions. With that much in mind, in the order in which they are sitting from left to right, Richard Clarke is the Special Advisor to the President for Cyberspace Security. He has actually been in government, in federal service, for 30 years, which is a wonderful record. He's worked under Presidents Reagan, Senior Bush, Clinton, and Junior Bush, and has been involved in a lot of the cybersecurity issues that we're going to be dealing with tonight for many years through several administrations. He served in several senior national security posts, most recently as National Coordinator of Security Infrastructure Protection and Counterterrorism on the National Security Council. And as National Coordinator, he's been involved in counterterrorism, cybersecurity, continuity of government, which was something that the Clinton President's Commission had focused on for a while. domestic preparedness for weapons of mass destruction, and international organized crime. That's quite a collection of responsibilities, and a lot of that is in fact relevant this evening. I can go on, and I will maybe if I feel like introducing further details, but I think that's probably enough for starters. Michael Moore is next. Spent 21 years in naval service as an aviation maintenance officer, and the next 2 years as Director of Operations for National Technology Associates in the Washington area. That's Washington, D.C., of course. Out here we sometimes think of the other Washington, but only when we're talking about some of the computer stuff in the Northwest Corridor. And in 1991, he joined SAIC, where he was for 12 years, with a wide range of responsibilities. And in November of last year, even though there's a typo here, and it says in November of 2003, he assumed the duties of Chief Technology Officer for the County of San Diego. And he's responsible for oversight of the San Diego County Information Technology, which is a huge responsibility considering there are 18,000 employees at over 200 sites. For those of you who are not local, it's the third largest county in the United States. Dr. Irwin Jacobs is an extraordinary person with a remarkable background. He started out as an academic at MIT in the early 60s, then at UCSD until 1972. He has a book that was first published in 1965, which is when I first got into security at MIT, and the book called Principles of Communication Engineering is still very relevant today. It's still in widespread use. He is the founder, president, chairman, and CEO of Linkabit, which he started in 1969. In 85, it grew to something like 1,400 employees. It merged into M/A-com in August of 1980. I read punctuation like Danny, yeah, right, yeah. And has then become the co-founder, chairman, CEO of Qualcomm. So he's an academic in his early days, a technical innovator, a corporate wizard, and the ultimate custodian of Qualcomm Park, which recently hosted the Super Bowl, at which he hosted a grand party for many people. So I think his background is very strongly in the future of digital wireless technology. He's done a lot with communications in general, but that is certainly the wave of the future. And so I think it's extremely relevant for this particular discussion. And finally, on the far right is Ron Bursma, who is the network security manager for the Navy SPAWAR, that's the Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command. And he's been employed as a civilian for the Navy since 1976, which is quite a ways back. And he's been involved in computer network security for 20 years. He has been involved in that really since the early days of the ARPANET, and has been working on protecting systems and networks at various military installations. He's got a very broad background as a programmer, operating system specialist, system manager, network engineering, network manager, and network security manager. And he's more recently led the architecture team for the Navy Marine Corps-wide intranet, NMCI, where he is still a technical advisor. So as you see, I think we have an extraordinary variety of expertise that's reflected here. And I hope that your questions and comments will probe some of the issues. I'd like to very briefly spend some time on the issues that I consider important. The first comment is really that the state of the art as we know it in terms of computer system security and reliability and survivability, network security, and overall architecture, implementation, and design is really rather pitiful. I think the events of the weekend illustrate the depth of the problems, where a flaw, an old flaw that was known 6 months ago in a Microsoft SQL server resulted in a buffer overflow that was exploited by a worm that effectively trashed, in the sense of flooding with traffic, a great many sites that were not Microsoft systems, just anything that had a port enabled for network traffic without any real authentication or anything. It's a UDP port, for those of you who know what that is. And the strange thing about that was that it brought down the Bank of America's ATMs. It brought down air traffic control centers in Houston, Cleveland, and New Jersey, or affected them in some serious sense. It brought down American Express. It brought down a Canadian electronic voting experiment that was in progress, actually a real election that was using the internet, which is a bad problem in the first place. Those of you who've read my risks forum, you know that that's an ultimate disaster of voting over the internet. And most surprisingly, it brought down a lot of sites at Microsoft, because they hadn't put in the patches that they were supposed to put in. And the question here is, who do you blame? Well, the answer is the operating systems and the SQL servers and things like that are just riddled with buffer overflows and security flaws. So you obviously blame Microsoft, and then you say, well, Microsoft's blaming the system administrators because they didn't put in the patches. But it turns out that the first 2 patch kits that they sent out didn't solve this particular problem, and it was only the one that they released a week ago that dealt with this one, which probably inspired somebody to launch the worm in the first place. So we're dealing with a situation in which you try to blame the vendor, you try to blame the administrators, you try to blame the users, and somewhere along the way you try to blame the government. And one of the questions that we've got to deal with this evening, I think, is how can we get around this particular problem? What can we do to improve the quality of the infrastructure that we're dealing with? When you realize that all of this infrastructure is being used heavily for the so-called national critical infrastructures, telecommunications and even pipelines and gas distribution and electric power and railroads and air traffic control and so on, you think about the fact that a little worm can affect so much, and yet that worm was relatively benign in terms of what it could have done. Another thrust that I think we may have to get at is why all of the wonderful things that have come out of the research community in the last 40 years have not found their way into the commercial marketplace. The marketplace does not drive success when it comes to security. The government doesn't seem to drive it either, and perhaps it shouldn't. So I think the problem here is that the chickens of neglect are coming home to roost, and we need to deal with these problems in a way that we haven't in the past. So with that much as background, let me turn over in turn to each of the speakers from the podium. Then we will all sit down and turn on our lapel mics, our wireless mics, and take your questions.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you all very, very much for coming out today to talk about this important topic. Thank you, Chancellor, for this great university as a venue and for all of its great contributions to the nation. I didn't go here, I went to MIT. But it may please you to know that when I talked to your counterpart at MIT last month and said, we know MIT is the best university in the country, but who's breathing down your neck? He said, UCSD. So I'm delighted to be here and to see that he's right. I'm also delighted to be on a panel with such distinguished Americans who have contributed so much already to cyberspace and securing it so that we can enjoy a secure country and a prosperous economy. But we won't for long enjoy cyberspace unless we secure it. Sometimes it pays to back up and to put things in perspective historically. In the beginning of the 1990s, as the internet was really taking hold, a lot of things were not true then that are true now. A lot of things quietly happened during the 1990s. What were they? One after another, we took important functionality in our economy and moved controls for those functions into cyberspace. So tonight, the electricity that lights this hall comes to us over a network controlled by cyberspace systems, by computers, by networks, using IP packets. The water in our cups came here over a network that was controlled by computers. Oil and gas, transportation, all the things that were just mentioned, the things that make our country work, are all controlled now by computer networks. And as the events of the weekend indicated, they're vulnerable. The ATM machines, the airlines, banks, finance houses, government agencies are vulnerable because they are dependent on cyberspace systems. We've never built cyberspace in a secure way. Now, is that important? It is, as long as we have enemies. Whether those enemies are, as the President said tonight, Iraq and Al-Qaeda, or if those enemies are some future group, some future nation or some future group, or perhaps even some Americans. But as long as we have people in the world who want to do us harm, and we are advertising to the world this enormous vulnerability that you can get at the United States, at its money, at its control systems through cyberspace, the two will eventually come together. Our enemies and our vulnerabilities in cyberspace will eventually come together. And when they do, they will make this weekend's little problem with the Microsoft SQL Server look like a party. We make a big mistake if we think that the things that we have seen in the past, the Code Red virus, the NIMDA virus, this event over the weekend, are in any way indicative of what could happen. As Peter said, this worm this weekend didn't really have a destructive payload, but it could have. And therefore, we as a nation have to figure out how we go back and make secure these systems that we have built up over the last 10 to 15 years. We cannot do it by having the government do it. We cannot do it by creating Big Brother. We have to do it in a partnership where all Americans who use cyberspace and who have control over some little bit of cyberspace participate together to secure it. That means home users who have broadband connections need to have firewalls. It means small companies and medium-sized companies need to take cyberspace security seriously and maybe outsource their security. It means government agencies and big companies need to take it seriously. Some big companies that were taking it seriously did very poorly over the weekend. Now, that suggests that we also need to think of new ways to do it and ask our universities and ask our great privately owned laboratories as well as the government laboratories, to figure out ways of making systems that work, systems that are not vulnerable to the kind of disruption that we saw over the weekend, or the kind of much greater disruption that's possible in the future. And we need to do all of this while maintaining our civil liberties and while maintaining our privacy rights. You know, the President has said that we cannot give up our civil liberties to defend ourselves against terrorism. We cannot give up our privacy rights to defend ourselves against terrorism, because when we start doing that, the terrorists have won. They've changed us. They've made us into another nation, a nation that we don't want to be. I think by using our technologies, our great universities and our private laboratories, our government laboratories, together we can come up with ways that make our nation's critical infrastructures and computer networks secure while maintaining our privacy rights and our civil liberties. This is the 11th meeting we've had around the country to hear from the American people on all aspects of cybersecurity. At the end of this process, the President will issue a national strategy to defend cyberspace. I expect, since apparently he's already signed it earlier today, that we'll be seeing it within the next week or so. But having that strategy released is only the beginning of what has to be a public-private partnership, where we all work together for the foreseeable future to identify the vulnerabilities in our computer networks, identify them and fix them. We all have to insist as consumers that we get better products. And we all have to, as users of cyberspace, do a better job of securing the parts that are under our own control. I look forward tonight to hearing from you about how you think we ought to do this, what you think our priorities ought to be, what you think works, and what you think doesn't work. Because when the President does issue our national strategy, that's only the first step. We have to implement it. And we may find that parts of it are wrong, and we may have to go back and fix it. We need to continue this dialogue that we've had for the last year around this country for the foreseeable future. And I urge all of you to be part of that dialogue and be part of the solution to secure cyberspace so that our economy can continue to grow and prosper, and so that our nation can continue to be secure. Thank you. I look forward to your questions tonight.
Next up is Mike Moore. Let me just quote from the prospectus, which says, "The purpose of this town hall is to raise awareness on the national strategy to secure cyberspace, to educate us on cybersecurity issues, and create a vehicle for individuals to provide feedback." We hope that works.
I feel very honored to be here. Had I known that this town hall was going to place me next to the CEO of Qualcomm, I would have tried to get the town hall moved up before the Super Bowl. But I thank you for the ticket anyway, Irwin. The blueprint that the President's Infrastructure Board has put together talks about different elements of our infrastructure throughout the nation, from the military to commercial entities to state and local government and academia. One thing we all share is the challenge of protecting our enterprises from a number of sources that would like to disrupt our ability to govern, provide services, or in general just make our life less enjoyable. This is a complicated task, and as we've added to the difficult aspects of cyberspace, we've made that task much more difficult. Like many state and local governments, San Diego County has major e-business initiatives to enable our citizens to obtain services faster, cheaper, and not have to visit county facilities if they choose to do so over the internet. That makes a particular problem for state and local government in that we have a desire to make more things accessible via this cyberspace, while we still have very, very critical information to protect because we are a state and local entity. Because the county shares data with services in support of multiple local jurisdictions, state and federal agencies, and any number of companies, it's imperative that we have the ability to assure our partners that we can protect those interfaces with them, and we need them to protect the data that they're seeking from us as well. Mr. Clarke spoke to it. There is an awareness that has to take place that's been caused by this increased ability for folks to be able to get at information via the cyberspace. There are new threats and vulnerabilities being introduced all of the time. One of the struggles that San Diego County faced, which is not peculiar to state and local government, is that we had a computer system that was put together over a 20-year period with a bunch of disparate parts that got hooked together over time, and as the vulnerabilities and the threats have matriculated, our infrastructure was not able to necessarily deal with those threats. One of the bold things that our County Board of Supervisors did about 4 years ago is they said, if we're going to deal with the future and be able to give access to our citizens and improve services, at the same time protect the data that we're entrusted with that we can't share with folks, we're going to have to start with an infrastructure that is somewhat holistic. We embarked then on a venture to replace the complete infrastructure, all of our computers, all of our telephone systems, every server, every element of our infrastructure, and I'm proud to announce tonight that we're about a month away from completing that transformation of our entire infrastructure, which will allow us then to focus on new vulnerabilities as opposed to holes that may have existed in our infrastructure over the way it was put together piecemeal. Quite honestly, we survived the weekend very well, but that's just because the vulnerability didn't get in a port that may be open somewhere in our county. So having the infrastructure doesn't mean that we're not penetrable. It just means that we are better focused on focusing on the new vulnerabilities. We clearly want to work with our partners. The County of San Diego is unique in that it has a geographical area that represents a county that's a pretty large county in terms of space. We have 18 cities, we have the port, we have a number of jurisdictions that we must interface with. We've got to do business with our public safety groups, which include city police and other public entities. We are trying to form partnerships with them, as this town hall is also trying to do, to make awareness of the data sharing and make sure that the data we transfer back and forth is not compromising our partners. Today, the County of San Diego is looking and continue to look at and we do a risk assessment that's ongoing. I think two things are absolutely critical for us to be successful, all of us in the nation, is to be ever vigilant and continue to assess the new vulnerabilities, and we're certainly in the game to do that. So, thank you.
Pleasure to be here with all of you. We did have a rather exciting weekend. We actually had about 230 or so guests here, so we probably could have fit another in there as well. But I should warn you, we actually not only had a entertainment at a football game, but we subjected them to about a full day of lectures and technical information and so on. So we made good use of the whole period. Qualcomm actually has a lot of focus on security, on protecting a lot of the data that we have in our computers, and probably that awareness goes back a few years ago. We were at the time in the business of manufacturing telephones, mobile phones, and those phones actually are fairly complicated computers. I'll touch on that later, but they have a lot of code in them. And one day, our MIS people, in looking through the things happening on the computer system, suddenly realized that a significant part of that code had been taken, copied, and actually traced over to a computer at USC. Nothing, by the way, to do with anybody at USC. Called the FBI. Actually, I think we were the first company, we're not the first company to have this problem, have this occur, but the first to actually notice it before the FBI called, because they were monitoring the USC site, and we actually had detected it first. But in any case, that whole incident caused us to realize that this is a very serious issue, particularly if you're in a company that's trying to innovate, develop new technology. Much of that is stored on computers, work being done on the computers, being done from home, being done many places. You want to be able to protect that open environment, but you also need to protect the data. And so we have gone ahead and focused in on these kind of issues for many years now. However, it's interesting that, again, if you work with many others, and luckily we have some very good resources in this area, as well as nationally, one can do that in a relatively efficient fashion. And I think right now we have something like 9 people devoted to the security issues in our IP department. And we spend about $3 or $4 million a year. So it's not a small operation, but percentage-wise, it's actually quite a bit smaller than a number of other companies. And it has worked out quite well. So we haven't had another incident like that. We have had, a few years ago, viruses that did penetrate some auxiliary computers that weren't properly protected. That again woke us up, and we did manage to get through this latest worm attack without any penetration of which we're currently aware. So the whole set of areas we continue to focus in on, try to do a better and better job. One of the things we do is to hire outside consultants to study the systems, and then use the same consultants after they've studied our systems to try to attack and see if they can penetrate. And so far, in fact, that's been successful. We've managed to keep them out. A lot of issues do come up with employees. You have passwords. People use social engineering to try to kind of trick you into giving away those passwords. So education is a very key part of that, as is just picking good passwords. And so we have automated attacks ourselves on the passwords people use to see if one can guess them, how long it would take, and then tell them that would not be an acceptable password. A lot of our work is done from home. We provide support for virtual private networks for our employees. We help them with the actual arrangements so that they can keep security at home, and try to, again, keep everybody educated. But one of the major issues is that we have people not only in the area but also traveling all around the world. And so it's something that you just have to kind of keep on top of. Of course, there's a series of problems that still come up. 802.11, I think many of you are familiar with that. That's a local area network, wireless, and quite popular, in fact, rapidly growing in popularity. Well, we suddenly discovered that we were one of those sites that somebody had noticed that you could reach from cars parked out on the street, and so we actually had to take down the system. There also was a indication that the encryption security had been broken. Actually, some people up at Berkeley did that work, I believe. And so we took the whole thing down for 8 weeks until we finally were able to put it back up again with some level of confidence. Another issue with traveling, of course, is just protecting your laptop. And I'm afraid I'm a poster boy for that problem. Giving a talk to a room full of journalists, actually, and left the computer up on the podium, stepped off to one side, came back, no computer. Journalists, of course, sent that information around the world, and so no matter where I travel, I always get the question, did you ever find your computer? The answer is no, but we think we know who in fact took it. Well, more interestingly, we're in the business of mobile phones, and that itself is going to be, I think, one of the areas that is going to take much effort going forward. A phone these days, a mobile phone, is a very powerful computer. We're now providing ever-increasing, always-on connections to the internet for your computer. We're also keep adding other features. This is a phone actually not yet sold in this country, sold in Korea using our CDMA technology. But this one has a 2.4 megabit per second peak connection rate to the internet wireless, so small devices, et cetera. And so all those issues that we are concerned about with our laptops, both the business and the home, are increasingly an issue on the handsets. And there are a set of other issues, of course, that come up with these. We, for example, also build in on actually the same chip we do a lot of our CDMA communications, a global positioning system receiver. And so now you have a whole security issue. Sometimes you dial 911, you want your position to be known. A much larger part of the time you don't want your position to be known, except perhaps to a few people. And so that whole protection, that whole secrecy area is a key one. And part of the solution is that we do some of the processing in the phone and then only part of it out on the network. And so that way you can hopefully ensure by the code in your phone that nobody is able to get that position. Well, the phone being a strong, a powerful computer, and as we all know, by the way, that power actually much more than doubles every year and a half or so. Moore's law gives you the doubling, but the fact that a lot of the functions aren't growing, and so what's left over is available for computing, that means that the device is being used in more and more ways. One of the ways is to download new software applications to the phone. And therefore, you always have the question, if you're not careful, when you download an application, does it have a Trojan horse? Is there some problem with it? And so we've come up with a whole other area of business we call Brew, where we began thinking right up front about the security issues. How do you have developers around the world develop applications that then can be downloaded to the phone and yet not raise havoc? You want them to be fairly powerful. You want them to have access to a lot of the capabilities on the phone. So one of the things we do ahead of time is have those applications be carefully tested. You can't do a perfect job, but you can do a very good job. And then put a digital signature on and have the phone check the digital signature to make sure nothing has been altered since that testing period occurred. And so that does give you some level of assurance. However, as you look forward, there's always a attack, counterattack, et cetera game, and so it's just going to be an ongoing test as we move forward. Luckily, with this additional computing power, you can provide additional safety, but you're also trying to do more and more things with your phone, and therefore that opens you to various attacks. Finally, I might note we, again, are also working with the government in a variety of ways. It used to be that you developed products for the government and then brought them over to the civilian area. Now we have some very powerful capabilities in the civilian area, wireless telephones being one of those areas. And so then the question is, can you take a civilian network and make it usable by the government? In particular, for example, provide government-level encryption and protection so that the data can be sent back and forth as well as encrypted voice. We do that, we essentially end up with phones that look like standard commercial phones, but that have the extra protections in them. There are other challenges. If you have something like the 9/11 situation, many emergency people need to use the phones. How do they get access? You need ability to have priority access. How do you do that in a fair way without denying other users the reasonable access to the systems? So there's a whole range of these issues coming up. Finally, I might note that another interesting use, and one that was used at the stadium, the phone I showed you also has, by the way, a video camera. It can take video and send it, can receive video. And as a result, there were some cameras scattered around the stadium, and one could bring back the views of that. Now, hopefully, most of the time, we're going to use these as nanny cams, the ability to have a little cam watching a baby crib or a traffic intersection, whatever, and then you can monitor that. But occasionally, you have to do more serious work with it. So again, I think we're getting technology that is going to continue to challenge us to protect it, but keep it open, keep it very useful for most of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
The organization I work for, SPAWAR, acquires and or develops information technology for the U.S. Navy and other organizations. And part of that organization is a large research and development laboratory here on Point Loma, and that's where I work. And a Navy laboratory on the internet has what we call a fairly large radar signature. First of all, being a military site, it's a big target because hackers like to attack military sites, because if they succeed in penetrating, then they get the bragging rights to having to be the one that broke into a particular military site. And of course, then there's the citizenry and others who are just anti-military, or there's foreign espionage, and so there's a lot of reasons we're concerned about that. But on the other hand, we are an R&D lab, which makes us very well connected to the internet for collaboration with academia, other researchers, and so forth. And in the organization that I'm responsible for, there are upwards of 20,000 computers, individual computer systems. And in the Navy at large, there's over 1 million. And what we found is over the years, there has been just an incredible increase in the number of attacks that we've seen. A few years ago, there was an occasional probe, scan, attack, or whatever. And today, we have literally hundreds or thousands of attacks per day that we're able to record. Those are unique individual attacks. My role at SPAWAR as a network security manager is to protect these systems, or try to protect them. And when you have upwards of 20,000 systems, 2/3 of which are Microsoft, and only of those, 1/3 of those Microsoft systems are centrally managed, the others being managed by just random system administrators, upwards of 2,000 of those on the various projects. It's a very diverse computing environment, and makes it a real challenge. Now, while the commercial world is interested in protecting things like intellectual property, privacy, financial integrity, and so forth, in the military, a lot of our focus is on protecting sensitive and classified information against unauthorized access and disclosure, to ensure reliability and availability and integrity of the network, even under attack. Because remember, there are warfighters out there that are putting their lives on the line, and we would not want to put someone's life at risk. So the stakes are high. One goal we also have, just as an aside, is to stay out of the paper, local paper, national, at least in a negative sense. It is not only embarrassing, you also get to visit the admiral and get yelled at, and it also erodes public confidence. If a mother knows that son Johnny is out fighting the war, they don't like to hear that the military network is insecure if it might put their child or loved one at risk. I do have a bit of historical perspective, been doing networking a long time, but it was 20 years ago, in 1983, that we had our first security incident where we actually recorded someone breaking into one of our computer systems. And that's when I started thinking about network security, and since I was a network manager, had to now have an additional task of trying to protect the network. And so over the years, I've seen many incidents, large ones like the Morris Worm in '88, which is when Computer Emergency Response Team was first started, a few days later. Later, we had an incident called El Gritón, where a hacker from Argentina, this was in '95, broke in. And this was when we actually got the first court-ordered wiretap of a computer network so we could monitor what was going on. Code Red, NIMDA, and this weekend SQL Slammer, and everything in between. We've seen it. Some of the challenges I face, and I'm sure others do too, when it comes to protecting the networks and the computing systems connected to it, we, the security providers, have to plug all the holes, but the hackers only have to find one vulnerability to get in order to penetrate. And security, therefore, is only as good as the weakest link. And we need to find ways to level the playing field. Today's contest just isn't fair. So it forces us into a fortress mentality too often, providing additional layers of security. But those are often implemented in ways that break the network. because a lot of the people installing that don't necessarily understand network architecture. They understand security, and their idea is to block everything, not realizing all that it breaks and the disruption that it causes. Now, new vulnerabilities arrive on a regular basis. Think in the physical world, if you're protecting a whole lot of buildings and the buildings all have doors and locks and so forth, and all of a sudden someone says, we just found that anybody can unlock one of those doors because of something free that they're giving out on the street. And the doors aren't just inside maybe a gate or something like that, or they're literally on the street or even in foreign countries where literally anybody, an adversary, could walk up, walk right in with the free token or whatever. That's about what we've got in the cyber world, when you think you're protected and all of a sudden there's a new vulnerability that's announced. You have to then essentially haul out the police, guard all your doors until you have enough time to put in all the patches on all the systems. And when you have tens of thousands of systems, that takes some time. It's a lot of work. Now, in a research environment, we need to stay as open and flexible as possible to allow a broad range of capabilities for our scientists and engineers. But you need enough protection to avoid intrusion and compromise, and this can be a really challenging balancing act to try to find that right balance. Now, it turns out that our own people are a part of the problem. People can do really stupid things, and luckily this is the exception and not the rule. I'll give you some examples. Popular one these days is setting up a rogue wireless network for convenience. Someone goes down to Fry's Electronics, get one of these little Linksys boxes for $100. It works great at home. He can sit in his armchair while he's watching TV on his laptop. This is cool. I'll try this at work. Brings it into work, hooks it up to the sensitive network, or horrors, maybe the secret network. I hope they never do that. And because it's convenient to go into the conference room or whatever with your laptop and not have to have wires. And so we see people putting up rogue networks, wireless networks, not taking any consideration that someone driving by down the street could also tune into it. They're on the inside network. They're inside the firewall. And at that point, you're really subject to compromise. Another problem is leaking of classified information. This really happens too much, where people just don't think. I can still remember one admiral when we said, why did you do this? And he said, well, I just emailed it to a .mil. Isn't that a protected network? It's a military network, and so there's a lot of education that's required in the user community. We've seen people connect networks together that are of different classification levels. One of the absolute rules in the government is you never connect the unclassified network to the secret network or the top secret network or the intelligence network or whatever. You absolutely do not do that. However, you'll find someone who doesn't like the inconvenience of having to have two different computers to go to the unclassified one to do email and go to the secret one and back and forth. Go down to the computer store, buy another NIC card, plug it in. You're on both networks at once. Life is good. Not realizing that they just put security at risk. People run risky software. Our biggest problem right now is the peer-to-peer stuff that's coming out because they suddenly turn themselves into an FTP server and say, here's all my files to the world. Or if we put restrictions on how people can do their job, you can't read email from home, or you can't do certain type of things. What they do is figure out ways that, hey, I'll just forward all my email to my hotmail.com account, have it all there, not thinking that that might be sensitive and that other people could probably read that. So, and then a big problem we have too is someone wants to try the latest version of Linux. They just got the CD, want to check this out, load it on the net, don't even think about security. I guarantee almost within 24 hours that machine will get hacked. We've seen it over and over again. So people in general, they're just trying to get their job done, trying to do the right thing, and they're going to use creative ways to get there even if security gets in their way. So some hot issues and concerns that I have. These patching efforts are huge. Some Microsoft flaws require us multiple man-years of effort to patch 10,000 systems or more. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for each patch. And new vulnerabilities are appearing almost daily. I mean, multiple times per week. We just can't keep up. Also, we deal with a lot of internet service providers. When we try to track down someone who's trying to break in, we like to call the ISPs and report what's going on. And there hasn't been a whole lot of cooperation. In fact, some in some of the foreign countries are actually better than some of the major ISPs in the US. And we need some kind of system or mechanism or certification or some kind of strategy where we can give an ISP a clean bill of health and say, this is a good ISP that has good practices and they shut down people doing bad things. And then other ISPs should only peer with them if they have the clean bill of health, they have the certification, seal of approval, or whatever. And if anybody fails to live up to that, they should kick them off, and so there'll be pressure. And I know that financially, that's not the best business practice to kick off all your customers because you're going to lose money. So we have to have some other mechanism to make that happen. I'm finding that an increasing number of network operations center personnel, security staff, and so forth don't understand how the internet works. And so we see a lot of policy and analysis coming out that just is not good. And then finally, policymakers, we find, can really make bad policy. They don't know the technology, they're not pragmatic about it, and unfortunately, ones like the military are very quick to pull the plug on the internet because the admirals and the generals, they think, if we're getting a denial of service attack, what do? You just unplug, and life is good, we're protected, not realizing that what they've just done is created an even larger denial of service attack because now we inside can't talk to the outside and vice versa. Final observation, a security solution really requires a partnership of all parties. I have seen government or the military try to implement solutions in its own way because they want to retain tight control and so forth. They always fail, or most often fail. But I've seen this pendulum swing the other way where the leadership in these organizations will just outsource everything, throw it over the wall because industry knows how to do this better, they say. But that also fails because when you write the specifications and it's implemented to very tight standards with no compromise, then you create a system that's unusable, almost unusable, or very painful to use. But on the other hand, I have seen where there's partnerships between government and industry and academia where you see incredible successes, and I'm glad to see that the cybersecurity policy is embracing that approach. And that's all.